The morning sun washed over Los Angeles like a promise, golden, warm, and full of dreams. But to one 4-year-old Marco Reyes, it felt more like a spotlight he wasn't sure he deserved. He stepped out of the small, aging car that his aunt had borrowed for the day, the door creaking loudly as if protesting the weight of his hopes. The sprawling arena loomed ahead of him, its glass facade reflecting the sky like a towering mirror of possibility. The letters AGT glimmered above the entrance, bold and intimidating. Marco swallowed hard. He pulled his backpack closer to his chest, feeling the familiar shape of the old cassette player inside a scratched, battered relic that once belonged to his father. It had survived storms, flights, and time itself, and now sat against his ribs like a heartbeat reminding him why he was here. His mother, Althea, gently reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Anik," she said softly in their warm Filipino lilt, "don't be afraid. You've already made us proud." Marco nodded, but his throat tightened. Pride was one thing. Facing the world was another. They walked toward the entrance, each step echoing louder than the last. Around them, massive banners showed previous AGT stars, dancers, comedians, opera singers smiling down like legends carved into marble. People rushed in all directions, contestants tuning instruments, families adjusting costumes, producers with clipboards calling out names. The air buzzed with tension, dreams, and nerves. Marco tried to steady his breath. Inside the waiting area, the world shifted into chaos. A girl in sequins practiced high notes. A magician rehearsed card flips at impossible speed. A group of breakdancers spun in perfect rhythm on the floor. Laughter, applause, chatter, everything swirled around him like a tornado of talent. Marco felt small. Too small. He tugged down his simple plaid shirt, feeling out of place. No glitter. No props. No backup dancers. Just him and a dream that felt fragile enough to crumble between two fingers. His mom noticed him shrinking into himself and leaned closer. "Remember what Papa always said?" Marco whispered, "Talent isn't the gift, the heart is." Althea smiled, her eyes misting. "Yes. Papa." Even hearing the word felt like a wound reopening. Back in the Philippines, long before tragedy struck, his father would dance with him on their tiny kitchen floor whenever Elvis Presley played on the radio. "The king had magic, Marco," he'd say, tapping the boy's chin playfully. "But the real magic is here." Then he'd place a finger on Marco's chest, right over his heart. They would sing loud enough for the whole street to hear, laughing, swaying, completely unaware of how quickly life could change. When the typhoon came, everything happened too fast. The water. The wind. The screams. And then, the silence that swallowed their home. Marco and his mother survived by sheer miracle. His father didn't. Hours later, Marco found the old cassette player floating nearby, waterlogged, cracked, but still intact. As if it refused to leave them. As if it insisted on staying until the boy found the courage to use it again. Now, years later, they were in America, starting over. And Marco was here on AGT, holding on to his father's memory like a lifeline. Contestant 3417, Marco Reyes. A staff member called. The voice sliced through his thoughts. Marco's stomach dropped. This was it. No more waiting. No more hiding behind memories or fear. His mother squeezed his hand. "I'll be right here when you come back." Marco nodded and took a step forward. Then another. But each step felt like walking deeper into a world where he didn't belong. What was he doing here? In this massive arena where people with brilliance in their bones came to shine. He was just an immigrant kid with a cassette player and a dream that might be too big for him. As he approached the backstage area, he saw other contestants waiting. A tall man in a sparkling blue jumpsuit, clearly an Elvis tribute artist, practiced a perfect lip curl. A woman with a golden microphone rehearsed runs so flawless even angels would be jealous. A group of boys had custom jackets with their stage names stitched on the back. Marco froze. What am I doing here? I can't compete with them. They look like stars. I look like a kid who wandered into the wrong building. His hands shook. His breath quickened. His vision blurred. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the cassette player. The tape inside was labeled in his father's handwriting, Elvis Favorites. He pressed it against his forehead and closed his eyes. "Papa," he whispered, so quietly the world couldn't hear, "I don't know if I can do this." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, somewhere deep in his memory, he heard his father's laugh, a warm, booming sound that always made their tiny house feel grand. He imagined his father's hand resting on his shoulder, steady and strong. "You don't have to be Elvis, Anik," his father's voice echoed in his mind. "You just have to be my son." The trembling eased, his breath returned. He slipped the cassette player back into his backpack and wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. A stagehand approached. "Marco? You're next." Marco inhaled slowly. He straightened his shoulders. He lifted his chin. And he walked toward the stage, not as someone trying to prove he belonged, but as a boy carrying the strength of where he came from. The curtain ahead glowed with warm light, outlining the entrance like a gateway to something bigger, something fate had been quietly leading him toward since the day he lost his father. Marco took one final step forward. "Papa," he whispered, voice steady now, "today I sing for you." And with that, he prepared to face the world. The stage was a world of its own, vast, glowing, and too bright to hide in. As Marco Reyes stepped forward, the lights washed over him like a rising tide, blurring the audience into a sea of shadows. He blinked against the glare, stomach twisting as the familiar silhouette of the judge's table slowly sharpened into reality. Simon Cowell. Heidi Klum. Sofia Vergara. Howie Mandel. Four faces the whole world knew, and now, the faces waiting for him. The crowd murmured, energy buzzing like electricity. Marco tried to steady himself, but his knees felt loose, almost unreliable. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears like distant thunder. The stage floor was cold beneath his shoes, and the microphone stand felt too tall, too official, like a monument marking the place where dreams lived or died. A stage manager gave him a thumbs up and disappeared behind the curtain. For a moment, everything went silent. Completely silent. Marco's breath hitched. Then Simon leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Hello there," he said in his unmistakable British accent. "What's your name?" Marco swallowed. I'm Marco Reyes." His voice came out smaller than he intended. He cleared his throat. "How old are you, Marco?" Heidi asked, her smile warm and motherly. I'm 14. A few gentle, SS, floated from the crowd. But Marco wasn't sure if they were for him or at him. "And what will you be doing for us today?" Simon asked, folding his hands as he studied the frightened boy before him. Marco gripped the microphone with sweaty fingers. "I'll be singing an Elvis Presley song." The moment the words left his mouth, a soft ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Not cruel, just surprised. An Elvis number? From a small Filipino teen who looked like he should still be in middle school. Even the Elvis tribute artist backstage, towering in glittering blue, probably wouldn't expect it. Simon raised an eyebrow, amused but intrigued. "Elvis?" he repeated. "That's quite a choice." Marco nodded, trying not to shrink into his shirt. "My papa. He used to play Elvis songs to help me sleep during storms back home in the Philippines. It reminds me of him." The audience quieted. Something shifted. The judge's expression softened. "That's beautiful," Sophia said gently. Marco's fingers tightened around the microphone. He passed away after a typhoon." His voice cracked, and the entire theater seemed to exhale with him. "So today, I want to sing one of his favorites." A hush fell across the space. Even Simon's face changed, losing its guarded skepticism. His eyes softened with that rare mix of empathy and respect. "Well," he said quietly, "I think your father would be very proud you're here." Then, with a small nod, "All right, Marco. Let's hear it." A stagehand pressed play. And then it happened. A glitch. A sharp buzz. A sputter of broken audio. Then silence. Marco froze. The track had failed. The audience murmured. Heads turned. A producer backstage frantically tapped buttons on the console. The large speakers emitted another weird crackling sound, then shut down completely. The world seemed to tilt. Marco's knees shook. His chest tightened as panic clawed at him. This couldn't be happening, not now, not after everything he and his mother sacrificed to get here, not after traveling across oceans, not after daring to dream. He glanced toward the wings, hoping for help, but the crew was scrambling. One of them shook their head, signaling that the audio system was down for now. It could take minutes. Maybe longer. Minutes he didn't have. Simon leaned back, watching him closely. "Do you want to wait?" he asked. His tone wasn't unkind, it was patient, even gentle, but hearing the question felt like a knife twisting inside Marco. If he waited, the crowd would get restless. His nerves would get worse. Worse, doubt would swallow him alive. Marco looked at the floor. His vision blurred. His throat closed. Failure sat on his shoulder, whispering that he had been foolish to try. He felt the sting of tears building, the humiliation rising. This was it. His moment slipping through his fingers like sand. The crowd held its breath. But then, a memory. A flash of warm laughter, his father's hand on his shoulder. His father's voice telling him, "The real magic is in your heart, Anik." He lifted his face. The trembling stopped. Something steadier, stronger, rose inside him. "No," Marco whispered, almost to himself at first. Then louder, with a breath that filled his whole chest, "I'll sing, without the track." A wave of surprise rippled through the judges. The audience stilled. "You sure?" Howie asked. Marco nodded. "Yes, sir." He adjusted the microphone, took one long breath, and stepped away from the stand, vulnerable, alone, but resolute. The stage felt enormous, like the world's biggest cliff edge. Then he closed his eyes and started to sing. Not with accompaniment. Not with confidence. But with something deeper, something ancient and raw, like a boy calling out across the ocean to someone he had lost. The first note quivered in the air. A low, soulful tone. Unexpected. Authentic. Heartbreaking. There was no laughter now. No whispering. Just Marco's voice, echoing across the vast auditorium, carrying the weight of storms survived, oceans crossed, and a father's love that refused to die. The spotlight wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Every word he released felt like a memory reborn. Every note carried both grief and gratitude. Marco wasn't just singing. He was telling the world who he was. Who he had lost. And why this moment mattered. The judges stared in stunned silence. Even Simon, whose face rarely revealed anything, leaned forward, eyes softening, jaw tightening, as if he were hearing not a performance, but a truth. A beautiful, aching truth. The audience watched, mesmerized. A cappella. No music. Just a boy and his heart. And somehow, it was more powerful than any track could ever have been. By the time Marco hit the last trembling note, the theater wasn't the same. Neither was he. And neither was anyone watching. The quiet after Marco's declaration felt unreal, like the theater itself was holding its breath, unsure of what would happen next. The audience leaned forward, the judges silent, and Marco, he stood trembling in the center of the stage, a lone figure against an ocean of strangers. No music. No backup, no safety net. Just him. Just his voice. Just his heart. Marco closed his eyes because looking at the thousands of curious faces was too much. Darkness wrapped around him, soft and familiar. In that darkness, he imagined himself back home in the Philippines in their small wooden house with the corrugated roof that rattled during storms. He imagined his father tilting his head back, laughing as he pretended to play guitar with a broomstick. He could almost hear the rain. He could almost feel the world he lost. And then, he sang. The first note that left his lips was fragile at first, shaking from nerves and the weight of standing in front of the world. But there was something else in it too, something unmistakable and piercing. Truth. A quiet gasp moved through the audience. It wasn't the voice they expected from a small, shy Filipino teenager. It had a texture husky, smoky, warm, carrying the unmistakable echo of Elvis but delivered with the sincerity of a child who had known loss too early. Marco's voice deepened as he pushed into the verse, his tone soft but full, resonating through the theater like a confession whispered to a friend. His hands shook at his sides, but his voice grew steadier, richer, every second he dared to keep going. Across the judges' table, Simon slowly leaned forward. His eyes widened not with shock, but with recognition. Something about the boy's tone, the restraint, the emotion, it wasn't mimicry. It wasn't imitation. It was soul. Sophia put a hand over her mouth. Heidi tilted her head, her brows lifting in surprise. Howie nodded slowly, as if saying, This kid is something special. Marco continued, the song climbing into the small cracks inside him. His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked once, barely noticeable, but instead of weakening the performance, it made it real. It made him real. He hit the next line with a tremor of grief so raw the audience's hearts clenched. Somewhere in the darkness of the crowd, someone whispered, "Oh my God." As Marco sang, memories poured through him like a river swelling after rainfall. His father lifting him onto his shoulders during town fiestas. The way his father's rough carpenter hands were always gentle when fixing his hair. How they danced. Barefoot on flooded floors during storms to distract from fear. Final moment he saw him, his silhouette swallowed by wind and water. Marco's voice cracked again, but he pushed through it, tears welling beneath his lashes. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, because this song, this moment, was not a performance. It was a goodbye he never got to say. The entire auditorium grew still. You could have heard a breath drop. Even the stage crew, usually too busy to pay attention, stood frozen at the sidelines. No one moved. No one fidgeted. Marco's voice had wrapped around them like a warm, aching blanket. He stepped forward unconsciously, drawn into the light, chasing the memory of his father. At the line where Elvis often added a soft vibrato, Marco did too gentle, untrained, but heartbreakingly beautiful. The purity of his tone made the front rows blink rapidly, trying not to cry. Every note felt like a hand reaching out, grasping for something no longer there. And yet, in his grief, there was hope. In his pain, there was strength. In his trembling voice, there was fire. The spotlight bathed him in gold, illuminating the tears on his cheeks like tiny diamonds. They weren't tears of fear now. They were tears of release, of healing. Marco reached the bridge, and his voice suddenly grew. Not louder. Braver. His chest expanded as he took in a deep breath, his eyes opening for the first time since the song began. They glistened under the lights. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at the judges. He looked up above the stage, above the rafters, to a place only he could see. As if he were singing to someone. Not for the audience. Not for the judges. Not even for AGT. For him. For his father. The audience's eyes shimmered. Some wiped their tears. Others pressed their hands to their chests. When Marco began the final refrain, the entire atmosphere shifted again. His voice no longer trembled. It soared. Tender yet powerful, echoing across the auditorium with a grace that transcended technique. Simon, the man known for his impassive composure, exhaled sharply and blinked. He had heard thousands of singers. Many brilliant. Many flawless. But few, very few, sang with a heart like this boy. A heart shaped by storms and softened by love. When Marcos sang the last note, rich, aching, lingering for a full 2 seconds, the world seemed to freeze. The sound hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament. Then it faded. Silence. Not the kind of silence that follows disappointment. Not the kind that precedes polite applause. A different kind. A sacred kind. A silence so complete, so profound, you could feel it press gently against your skin. Marco lowered his microphone with shaking hands. His breathing was uneven, his heart pounding, his body suddenly aware of how exposed he had been. For a second, he thought he had made a mistake. Maybe the silence meant they didn't like it. Maybe he should have waited for the track. Maybe then, someone stood. Then another. Then 10. Then 100. Then the entire auditorium rose to their feet in one sweeping wave of emotion. Thunderous applause erupted, crashing against him like a warm tidal wave. Marco gasped, startled by the sound. He looked around, eyes wide, as the crowd clapped, cheered, and shouted his name. Strangers who had doubted him minutes ago were now wiping tears, clapping above their heads, yelling "Bravo," with pure admiration. Simon stood too. Slowly. With intention. His eyes were shiny. He wasn't smiling, he was moved. He whispered, though not quietly enough. "Wow." Marco's throat tightened again. His hands pressed against his chest, overwhelmed. He had done it. He had sung. He had healed. He had honored his father. And the world had heard him. For 3 long seconds after Marco's final note, the world seemed suspended, weightless, silent, breathless. Those seconds stretched, 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 until even Marco began to hear his own heartbeat again. He stared down at the stage floor, terrified. In his mind. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe they were quiet because they didn't like it. Maybe I should have waited for the music. Maybe I failed Papa. His lungs tightened. His fingers trembled. His throat closed. Then a sound. A single clap. Followed by another. Then another. And suddenly, like a dam breaking, the entire auditorium exploded. A roar of applause erupted, so loud it startled Marco backward. The audience surged to their feet, thousands rising as one, as if pulled upward by the gravity of what they had just witnessed. People clapped overhead, whistling, cheering, shouting his name. Marco. That was amazing. Oh my God, he sang from his soul. The sound shook the walls. Marco blinked rapidly, his tears blurring the sight of the massive theater full of strangers standing for him. He had never imagined this tidal wave of love, this thunder that felt like the heartbeat of the universe answering his. Heidi pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Wow." Sophia looked emotional, her eyes glassy. Howie clapped with wide eyes, nodding like he'd just witnessed something rare. But it was Simon the world watched. Simon Cowell didn't move at first. He simply stared at Marco, his expression unreadable, his eyes deeper than before, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then, with a slow inhale, Simon stood. The audience gasped. Simon didn't stand often. Not unless the performance reached somewhere deep inside him. Marco's eyes widened, his breath catching sharply. He didn't understand what was happening, only that somehow the quietest man in the room was telling the loudest truth. Simon lifted the microphone. His voice, usually confident and sharp-edged, came out surprisingly soft. "Marco," he said, pausing as if choosing his words carefully, "that was real." The crowd cheered again, but Simon raised a hand, stopping them gently. "No, listen. There are singers with range, with big voices, with technique. But what you just did." He exhaled. "That was heart. And the world needs heart. Marco bit his lip, emotion flooding him in waves he could barely withstand. Simon's eyes glimmered, not fully tearful, but close enough that the camera zoomed in, capturing something rare, something raw. His voice tightened slightly. "You made all of us feel something tonight," Simon continued. "And your father, I have no doubt he's unbelievably proud right now." Marco's breath trembled. The mention of his father shattered him open, and a sob escaped before he could stop it. He covered his mouth with his hand, shoulders shaking. The crowd softened with him, no jeers, no impatience. Just silence, sympathy, warmth. Simon lowered his gaze for one contemplative second. Then he looked at the judges' table. Then, at the golden buzzer. The room froze. He placed his hand on the golden button slowly, deliberately, like he was touching something sacred. Marco's mother backstage covered her mouth, her knees nearly buckling. "Marco," Simon said softly, "this is for every kid who has lost, every kid who has dreamed, and every kid who thinks they're not enough." And then bam! Simon slammed the golden buzzer. A brilliant explosion of gold erupted from the ceiling, flooding the theater with shimmering confetti. The music swelled deep, triumphant, emotional. The audience screamed with joy. Marco gasped, stumbling backward in shock. Gold rained around him, landing on his hair, his shoulders, his trembling hands. Each piece of confetti felt like a blessing, one he never thought he would receive. He stared up, mouth open, his entire body shaking as the golden storm wrapped around him like a glowing embrace. He had dreamed of this. Imagined this. Prayed for this. But never believed this moment could belong to him, an immigrant boy from a storm-broken town, singing with nothing but his heart and an old memory of Elvis. Backstage, his mother burst into tears, loud, overwhelming sobs that came from years of carrying the world alone. She pressed a hand to the monitor, whispering, "Anak, you did it. You did it." Marco put both hands over his face and cried openly, golden confetti sticking to his wet cheeks. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed, humbled, grateful beyond words. The judges stood too now, Howie clapping, Heidi wiping her eyes, Sophia smiling through tears. Marco's whole body buzzed with disbelief as he looked at the judges, the crowd, the confetti falling like blessings. Then he looked upward, toward the rafters, toward the unseen place where he felt his father's presence most strongly. "I hope you saw this, Papa," he whispered. When the song finished and the confetti finally slowed, Simon left his seat and approached the stage. Marco, still trembling, instinctively stepped back, but Simon smiled softly. "It's okay," he said, his voice steady. "Come here." Marco took a hesitant step forward, then another. Simon opened his arms, and for the first time ever on a stage that had made so many dreamers nervous, Marco fell into a hug, one that felt like acknowledgement, acceptance, and healing all at once. "You're incredible, Marco," Simon whispered. "Don't ever doubt that." Marco felt his throat tighten again. "Thank you, sir, thank you so much." When he finally walked off stage, gold still clinging to his clothes, the audience was still cheering, still standing, still moved. Marco had not only sung for his father. He had sung for everyone who had ever lost someone. Everyone who had ever been scared. Everyone who had ever dared to dream against all odds. He had shown them something timeless. Something real. After the confetti stopped falling. A week after the episode aired, the world was no longer the same for little Amira Santos. The AGT clip, her tiny hands clutching the microphone, her trembling voice carrying the grief of a whole village, had crossed oceans. The video was everywhere, on news channels, in reaction videos, in classrooms, in churches, and on millions of phones held by people who had never heard of her country before, let alone her family. But for Amira, none of that noise existed here in the quiet, sunlit hospital room where her father lay hooked to machines that beeped like the slow ticking of time. She's curled in a chair beside him, her chin resting on the bed sheet, humming the same melody she sang on stage. Not for fame. Not for cameras. But for him. "Papa. You can hear me now, right? She whispers gently, brushing the back of his hand with her thumb. Her father doesn't respond. His chest rises and falls with the help of a ventilator. His body is thinner now, and the once strong hands that lifted her like a feather look fragile and pale. But there is peace in his face today, as if some part of him remembers the song carried across the world. The door quietly opens. Mama Luz enters, holding her phone with both hands, her eyes watery yet glowing. Amira, she whispers. The little girl sits up quickly. Mama? Did something happen? Her mother nods slowly, overwhelmed, trembling but smiling in a way Amira hasn't seen since before the war. I think you need to hear this. She turns the screen toward Amira. It's a live video from a small coastal village in southern Philippines, their old home, now slowly being rebuilt. Her uncles, cousins, neighbors. The whole community has gathered in the ruins of the chapel. Children sit on broken pews. Women stand beside walls charred by fire. Men hold tools, hammers, makeshift instruments. And everyone is singing her song. The same lullaby her Papa used to sing when the world still felt whole. The melody fills the room like a warm tide, rising gently, washing away the cold space between past and present. Amira gasps, her small hand covering her mouth. There. They're singing it. Mama nods. Your song didn't just touch Simon, Anik. It reached home. Then another voice joins the choir of villagers, a familiar one. Tito Jomar, her father's closest friend. His eyes on camera are swollen from crying. He holds a radio microphone patched to a speaker with wires and duct tape. We sing this, he says to the people gathered around him, because this village remembers the Santos family. And because hope came from an 8-year-old girl thousands of miles away. Amira begins to sob softly. They heard me, Mama, she whispers. They really heard me. Mama wraps an arm around her, kissing the top of her head. Yes, Anak. The whole world heard you. But the miracle isn't over. Another sound begins, a weak, raspy noise, like a long-forgotten breath forcing its way through dust and silence. Amira freezes. Mama's eyes widen. They turn slowly toward her father. His fingers, those silent, unmoving fingers, twitch against the bedsheet. Once. Twice. And then. His hand closes very faintly around Amira's. Papa. She chokes out, voice trembling. His eyelids quiver, struggling, fighting, pushing against the heavy fog of unconsciousness. And then for the first time in months they open. Not fully. But enough. Enough for a father to see the blurry outline of the daughter who never gave up on him. Enough to see the little girl whose voice carried his memory across continents. Ra, he manages to whisper, barely audible, barely shaped, but real. Her heart bursts. She throws herself gently onto his chest, careful of the tubes, crying into his hospital gown. Mama. Papa, he said my name. He said my name. Mama collapses to her knees beside the bed, both hands covering her sobbing mouth. Alfred, she breathes, touching his face, you came back. You came back to us. His lips shift into the faintest, weakest smile. His eyes slide slowly toward his daughter. A tear escapes the corner of his eye. And then, like a fragile whisper, he says, I heard you singing. Those 5 words shatter every wall in the room. Amira sobs harder, her small fingers gripping his hand like she's anchoring her soul to him. I'll sing again, Papa, she whispers fiercely. As much as you want. I'll sing every day. He closes his eyes again, this time not in unconsciousness, but in rest. A peaceful rest. A present rest. Hours later, doctors confirm her father's condition is improving for the first time since the attack. Slow, fragile. But improving. When they step outside, a reporter gently approaches their small family. Amira. Do you know your performance is now AGT's most viewed clip this year? And you've inspired thousands of war-affected children to send their own songs and messages. How do you feel? She looks at the camera. Her big brown eyes aren't the eyes of a child who wanted fame. They're the eyes of a child who carried her past like a lantern. I didn't sing to become famous, she says softly. I sang because I thought my papa needed to hear me. And now, I think the world needed to hear him too. Hear him? The reporter asks. She nods, tightening her grip on Mama's hand. My papa always told me. When life breaks you, sing louder. The reporter smiles through tears. And what will you do next, Amira? She lifts her chin, confident and radiant. I'll keep singing, she says with a gentle smile. So, no child in war feels alone. And so every father finds their way back home. As the sun dips behind the hospital building, Amira walks down the hallway humming her lullaby. And somewhere behind those doors, a once-lost father listens. A nation heals. And the world remembers the voice of an 8-year-old girl who turned pain into a miracle. For some people, music is entertainment. For her, it was survival. And for millions, it became hope.